thank you very much. Welcome to the second session here in the Hive today in the first ever inaugural Yeo Valley Organic Garden Festival. Thank you very much for coming. We are here thanks to a lot of very clever people, Sarah and Tim Mead being two of them who had the idea for this in the first place, and a fabulous team. And as the headline marquee, Rocket Grow, Toby being the MD of that, you'll hear from him in a minute, who is a peat-free compost constructor and many other things, and a neighbour. So thank you for sponsoring and making this happen. I'm going to hand over now to Tom White, who works for Yeo Valley and is, and I quote, the regenerative farm manager here. He's leading the panel, as you know, on how can gardeners take responsibility for climate change, which sounded, we decided, a bit, it's all your fault, it's all our fault. So we've kind of, we've rather rejigged the whole title in what can we all do? What can we do between us as gardeners to aid? So with no further, fire exits are just the doors you came through, in fact, just in case. But with no further ado, I'm going to hand over, and there will be time for questions at the end. So there'll be a little half-hour chat and then some time for questions. So I'm going to hand you over now.
Thank you, Kath. And yeah, welcome to Homefield at Holt Farm. Great to see you all. Thank you for coming along. I'm going to ask my panellists to briefly introduce themselves, starting at this end.
Okay, hi, I'm Sally. I'm a no-dig organic farmer and gardener, South Somerset, so I haven't come far today. And my main interest is really on climate change and how it's affecting our gardens.
I'm Ari Anderson. I'm a garden designer, writer, and TV presenter.
Yeah, and my name's John Little. Not quite sure what I do, actually. A mixture of things, mostly promoting gardeners and the role they have in making the world a better place, I guess.
My name's Toby Thomas, and I'm the managing director and co-founder of Rocket Grow Peat-Free Composts, based in Somerset, just down the road.
Super, brilliant. So as Kath said, we decided that this session was about solutions. What are the solutions within gardening which can contribute to the challenge of climate change? So what we're going to do is each of the panelists is going to speak for about 5 minutes on the topic, on their experiences and their thoughts, and then we're going to kind of see where that leads us, come into some questions and address those. So Toby, because you've got slides, would you mind leading us off on that so we can make sure that the audio-visual goes as it needs to with your clicker? Would you like to take it away?
Okay, will do. So I thought there's a lot about compost nowadays, that it's not just a bag of growing media anymore. Every brand, every bag is different, the ingredients. And I thought I'd just touch on a little bit that's directly related to this discussion point, which is the carbon journey. Our own carbon journey is what we can do to lessen our carbon footprint, perhaps, and do our little bit to help. And here at Rocket Grow, we have a 6,000-acre farm. On that farm, we farm arable crops, maize, rye, and grass. We put those crops into biodigesters, and those biodigesters produce biomethane. And the biomethane goes into the local grid, and we power 11,000 homes with that, with green energy. So that's all very exciting. What comes out the other end is a really rich substrate. It's called digestate, and in our circumstances, that's maize, rye, and grass that's composted down, really rich, full of microbes and nutrients, and we put that back on the land to grow the next crop. So it's a lovely virtuous cycle. That ingredient forms the basis of our compost range, and as a result of that, we have a very low carbon footprint as a business. Our entire bagging line is run on green energy. Our entire farm is run on green energy, so we're very lucky we've got that in place. We're moving on from that journey, going to the next stage of trying to do better. And we clean our biomethane through these towers here. And one of the things that happens when we do that is we release a lot of CO2. A lot of CO2 is released in the production of that. And our next stage of becoming the world's first climate positive compost producer is we are collecting the CO2 and we are putting that CO2 through a cleaning process. It's very complicated and a lot of shiny pieces of equipment that does it. And we will be bottling that and sending that off to the fizzy drinks industry. So that's never been done before in the compost manufacturing business. This is a lovely slide. I didn't draw this. I wish I could, but this is a very green, it's very dirty what we do really when it comes to mud and tractors and things. So this is a lovely little example of how it could be. But we're going one step further. So with the biomethane, we can create compressed natural gas. So CNG, which is the next element of our journey. And with that CNG, we can power the lorries that take our compost from our green energy run plants to your garden centre to deliver the bags of compost on green renewable energy. And that's our next step in our journey, and powered by nature. And the next step we're going even further than that, is the tractors we have on our land, on our farm, will be run by CNG. So we're farming the crops so it gets a bit complicated. We're farming the crops that go into the biodigesters to make biomethane, which are run by the biomethane itself, that then creates the compost that goes into your bags, that are put in the bags with green energy, that go to your garden centre with green energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just goes on and on. So it's a lovely story, but it's not straightforward. But we're investing a lot of money and putting a lot of science into what we do, so that your bag of compost, your bag of Rocket Grow in your local garden centre is much more than just a bag of compost. There's a great story there. And by using our products, for example, and being careful with your choices when you buy products in garden centres, you can do your bit to help with this discussion here when it comes to your footprint, your carbon journey. And that's what we're doing at Rocket Grow.
Super, thank you. Very exciting. I saw a smiling cow on one of your slides, which is very welcome around here. And also, you know, we're a manufacturing business, and big, shiny kind of equipment always gets us quite excited. But I was going to go to Sally now, because I brought with me a fun fact today. I feel like this little piece of the talk spoke a lot about perhaps avoided emissions. So how do we not release some emissions that might have come previously from energy production or from other compost materials? And one of the things I wanted to come on to is kind of soil health and soil carbon. So I wrote down some facts. So in Homefield, where we're sitting on Holt Farm, we had it measured through a laboratory recently. There's 240 tonnes per hectare of carbon stored in our soil. That equates to 882 tonnes of carbon equivalents in the atmosphere, and over this 3.5 hectare field, that's 3,178 tonnes of carbon that we're sitting on right now. And for us, that's the flip side of the conversation here, is this: we have to avoid emissions, we have to address those things we're doing which might release carbon into the atmosphere, but also we want to pull it down, we want to foster soil health, we want to build the bank account that's beneath our feet. So and we know that contributes to water as well, Sally. So if you could touch on those things, you know, no-dig practices and the way that we treat the soil can really affect how it stores carbon, how it behaves.
Yeah, that's fine. So I always tell gardeners that the soil is their most important asset. I am a no-dig gardener. I have been for many, many years, actually. And I think this year was a clear example of how important it was to leave your soil intact and not to play with it and not to dig it. Because the soil is not only capturing all the carbon, and every time you put the fork or spade in and you turn it, all that valuable carbon is oxidized and disappears back out to the atmosphere. But it's also helping your plants to be more resilient in times of drought. Because the soil is intact, it means all those fungal hyphae are all intact, and the plant is able to pick up carbon and water using its fungal partners, its symbiotic mycorrhizal fungi. So keeping that soil intact during the summer was really important to help your plants' resilience. And of course, I always mulch my soils to keep the water in, to prevent evaporation, and help those plants get the water they need. I know we've had really dry summer, and we're probably all using water butts and harvesting water, hopefully. But soil is so important as a reservoir of water. It It's so important to get water into the ground where the soil can hang on to it, and from then to pass down into the water table. So it's replenishing the water cycle. Because if we don't get the water into the ground, there isn't going to be anything coming out of our springs and our rivers. It will all just rush off down the rivers to the sea. So we all have a role as gardeners to harness the water to get it into the soil. And I've been talking a lot this year about slowing the flow of water and how it's important that every gardener gets involved with that. And I'm just, in my few minutes, I just want to get very excited about water butts. It may seem, but they're actually brilliant. Not only do you use your water butt in summer to harness the water, to capture it, to use it, so it's clean water that isn't chlorinated, and you're not putting lovely, clean, fresh water that you paid a lot of money onto your garden. You're using harvested water. But actually, your water butts are really important as a flood preventative over the winter months. We've seen increasingly with climate change how more of our winter weather ends up as very heavy downpours that we need to deal with. And so by slowing the flow, making our surfaces more permeable, we can help that way. But the water butt has been found to be really important in that, as reducing the storm surge. So if you could keep your water butts partly empty or completely empty over the winter months, when that first storm surge comes, it captures that amount of water and then releases it slowly. And they've found, actually Southern Water have found, that if you reduce the flow by just a few minutes, you can reduce the pressure on the local drainage and on the local sewage works. And if you live in a town, a city that goes back to pre-1970 housing, so much of your drainage is surface water drainage combined with your sewer drainage. It all goes to the sewage system. And that's why we have so much sewage flooding in our urban areas. It's all getting overladen. So if you could just slow the flow in your own garden spaces and the areas around you by reducing the impermeability of your front gardens, having water butts and having them empty before the storm surge comes, you will actually reduce flooding in your own communities. And when I talk to guys down on the Somerset levels, which aren't too far away, they really would like you to reduce the flow of water because they see your water when it rains. So that's all I want to say for the moment.
Super, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think on this farm, the drought is still very, very recent history. I think the farm team can be very pleased with how swiftly things have greened up. Soil health is obviously kind of working, but that ability to slow the flow, like you say, reduce the severity of that when it's coming down really hard and fast, as it seems to now, and to be able to store water up in the landscape, water butts, ponds, swales, there's loads of stuff being experimented with, isn't there?
Rain gardens.
Yeah, to allow you to utilise it for longer or store it up for when it's needed, I think is only going to become more and more important. And we talk a lot about climate target setting and emissions reductions and things, but we're also going to have to think about resilience and what are the techniques we're going to need as things warm up. I think, John, now I feel the last two speakers, we've spoken in a farm countryside kind of setting. Perhaps you could talk a bit more about your experience of climate solutions in urban environments, in design and the areas you work in.
Yeah, I could. I suppose the first thing I'd like to say is if we're asking gardeners to fix climate change, or we're asking gardeners to do something about climate change, then we need more gardeners to do that. That's something I think that we totally underplay, is that more gardeners in public space could fix lots of things. You don't have to be spending on huge pieces of infrastructure to make it a better place. And of course, gardeners are very low carbon. Very low carbon. They don't ask for much. They can go on a sandwich a day, and they can do wonderful things. And I think if we're not careful in this world, this kind of, if we're not careful that we don't stray into the greenwash world too much and thinks we can fix everything by infrastructure, when actually we could fix most things by having more people on the ground actually looking after places. And obviously, while they're on the ground doing good things, they're having a conversation with you guys, if they're in public space, and giving you ideas and inspiring you to do good things in your own garden. So gardeners do all those things. They fix the climate, they can record the ecology, they can have a conversation with you all, they can change everything. But we don't value people and people's energy. We don't invest in people's energy. We invest in infrastructure, pretty much. So I don't know whether any of you have had a chance to apply for funding for stuff. If you do apply for funding, you're generally going to be offered money to build things, aren't you? You know, a community garden, a school wildlife garden. How easy is it for you to get money to actually employ a really good local gardener to look after a place? Much, much more difficult. So I think we've really got to be careful we don't miss the impact that people have and their energy has. And we don't drift off into this kind of, we're going to fix it with a green wall or a whatever else piece. So that's my first little nag. I guess the other thing that I'm very interested in is using materials to produce landscapes that are already on site. Now, again, I'm more in a public space world and the development world rather than domestic gardens, but if there's big developments going on, if there's any disruption to the landscape, any highways work, anything like that, we really need to have a good discussion about what materials are going to be produced, what waste is going to be produced from that work, and can we put that back into the scheme that we're going to leave? Can we put those materials back? And it's quite easy to do that. We have machinery and we have equipment to crush things and deal with stuff and then reuse it back into the landscape. And we've been experimenting with waste, demolition waste in various forms to produce landscape, to produce really interesting growing medium and really interesting flora diversity, as well as insect and other habitat. So I think there's a huge potential to look at that. And talking of that, there's a thing that I always, when people come down to us, something I always think is worth bearing in mind is that you don't have to make all your plants 100% happy. So plants that are a little bit stressed, a little bit unhappy, often can be really interesting, can actually be preferred by some invertebrates and be quite cool. So I'd say bear that in mind. The other thing I'd say, following on from the water thing, water butts definitely, really good idea though to deal with the water before it comes off the roof. So put a green roof on whenever you can, but don't put a mean little thin seed and mat roof. Put as much soil as you can. So if you're designing something or you're getting anything built, make sure the architect or whoever's doing it, tell them you want a decent loading on your roof to get 6 to 8 inches of soil on there. And then you'll have a wonderful green roof that's really good for biodiversity. And of course, the more soil you put on your roof, the more water you're going to hold, the less water that's going to come off, the cooler the building will be underneath. And the other thing to do is to think also about when the water does come off the roof, make it come off in a beautiful way. Yeah. So there's my lovely colleague, Wendy Allen, sitting in the front row here. Have a look at her website and you'll see how to take water off a roof down a downpipe in the most beautiful way. We don't have to do things in a bog standard way. You can make water flow really look cool in the same way as you can make a green roof really look interesting if you use more soil and you use lots of different structure, because it's not all about plants with a lot of these places. Green roofs look really cool if they have lots of structural materials, log piles, brick piles, sand piles, temporary water. You could do all that on a roof quite easily and it still functions. So I'd say those are the 3 things that I probably are as most interested in.
Super, thank you. I think beauty as a key performance indicator, I think gardeners probably know this, but something we experience often is with very diverse cropping mixtures with agroforestry woodlands, people who aren't necessarily knowledgeable about ecosystems or food systems or farming systems still very much recognise that there's ecological function in beautiful landscapes and beautiful situations, and they're probably doing carbon and water as well. But I think that's something that we could often take away as a KPI.
Wildlife doesn't care whether it looks good or not. You don't have to make it woolly and untidy for it to be good for wildlife. You can make it beautiful and it be good for wildlife. And I think that's been a problem that we've had. We've had conservationists on one side and ecologists on one end, garden designers on the other end. And if we overlap those 2 things, we can still produce beautiful biodiverse places that look really cool. Because you won't get these things into urban places unless you make them look good. So we can make them look good.
Super, thank you. So Arit, Yeah, we just talked a little bit about beauty there. I think you've spoken about emotional connection to gardens, and I'm interested in your experiences around whether people's feelings, their emotional connections to their garden, but perhaps also their feelings about the environment, about climate, and things like that. Are those driving design decisions? Are there projects going on that you feel are really influencing? What's your experience here?
Yeah, I think, as John just said then about, making things look good, I think that there was a little bit of a time when, unless we were kind of just getting old plastic bottles and cutting them up and, everything was looking a little bit sort of higgledy-piggledy. I mean, at the end of the day, that's not a design aesthetic for everybody. And I think that we have to be kind of remember that in the room, we're all individual. We all want a different individual space, but it's understanding the goals that we're trying to get to. So I think, again, we garden because we love gardening, but I think one of the things that's really important is that we do a reevaluation of where we're at, and we reevaluate the space that we're in. So, of course, one of the great examples of that is Great Dixter. Do people know Great Dixter Garden? And if you don't, please look it up. So Great Dixter Garden, Fergus Garrett, who's the head gardener there, he's gardened there for nearly 30 years. And I saw him at a talk, actually at yours, John, when there was a talk at yours. And Fergus looked like he was about to just explode. It was just, he's the most energetic, energised, enthusiastic gardener anyway, but he was what I call fizzing. He was absolutely fizzing. And because basically he'd gone back into the garden space, and they've obviously always had good garden management there, but he was beginning to look at the garden through the lens of entomology and looking actually at all of the microbeasts and wildlife that was around in the garden. And by that really kind of reconnects him to the garden. He's a fantastic plantsman. He can make a border look beautiful. But now, all of a sudden, this guy was literally down at sort of soil level and up in the rafters, and this whole space came alive in a different place. And that meant that was able to, that the decisions that him and the garden team were making, they could actually enhance those decisions. And the fact, as John just touched upon, about with conservation and these divides that we get, this very binary look at things, you're native, you're non-native, you're conservation, you're horticulture, all of this binary thinking that people keep trying to drive us down. It's the ecotone, it's the bit in the middle, actually, where there's a lot of excitement that can happen. So in that particular garden example, the actual wider countryside where you would probably expect to have a bigger biodiversity audit of what was found, it was in the garden where there was many more versions of plants, habitat creation that was there. So I think that as gardeners, now, and obviously we like to think of what we do as green, but we obviously do create waste, we create carbon issue within our gardens. I think it's about going back and reevaluating the space that you have now. Rethink about what you've got. Often, of course, we have our loves, so we go back and we do them over and over again. I live in an urban environment. I'm in a very small garden. I don't have acres, and I'm on a flight path. So I have to kind of go back and think, oh, actually now the tree canopy that I've put in has grown up. So those sun-loving plants that I used to love, obviously I can't have them anymore, and I've got to think differently about the plant material that I bring in. And of course, when we think of plants for pollinators, well, most of those plants live in the sun. How nice. I've got to rethink about that again. I have to think about the heat generation that I'm bringing into an urban environment. My garden, I have about 5, 6 small trees, large shrubs that I've been there nearly 15 years now, have grown up. The temperature difference in my garden versus my neighbour's garden, so we're both on 10 metre by 4 metres, old money, 12 foot by 30, I think. And they have, again, no criticism of them, they have their own garden needs, they have an artificial lawn down, they have about 4 different tiny low-level shrubs, and they can't believe the heat difference in our gardens when we have those really high summers. So it's about thinking about what have I got in my garden that can reduce heat, Bringing in trees, we didn't get to touch on it before, but the actual tree selection that you have in a changing climate is really important. That is another talk for another day, I'm afraid, but that is really incredibly important. In the small garden that I've got, the guy that I wrote the book with, he's like, right, Arit, so what's your succession planning? I'm like, well, hold on a minute. I've just got, they've only just grown up. He said, yeah, but you've got trees that are all going to go at the same time. They're all in the 25-year period. So I'm like, right, again, we were talking this morning about futurising. So I've got to think about what trees would I start to grow or introduce now for when the Ceanothus croaks it, which it will. You know, it's already looking like it's waving goodbye to me. So this sort of succession and continual future thinking within your garden, which I know we can sometimes do on a season-by-season level, but we've now got to put on the environmental impact. What happens now, you can all record, you now all have a history of what happens in a year where drought starts in spring. And it may even go through this winter yet, we don't know. We've had a couple of downpours. So that's a learning. So what are we all going to do differently in our gardens next year to combat that? So I think that sometimes getting back into the process of gardening and the process of what's happening in our space, rather than, I used to remember sitting at talks like this, just tell me the plants, just tell me the plants. Well, I'd write a list of plants, go home, and none of them were appropriate because they were generic plants for somebody else's site. So really knowing your site is the biggest value that a gardener, I think, can do.
Super, thank you very much for that. We're going to go to questions shortly. You guys can't see this. We have a clock with birds on it, so we're between the blackbird and the blue tit at the moment, and we've got to be wrapped up by the tawny owl, okay? Could I just have we're not going to just go to questions yet, but there are lots of questions. Can I have a show of hands for who might have a question in a little while? We've got one. We must be able to do better than that. I'll do. Yeah, okay, super. What I was going to ask from each of you, I think talked about good levels of soil on roofs and things, but are there some simple calls to action, some simple replacements or substitutions or changes that you guys are keen on at all?
I'll just sort of stick with trees at the minute. Again, if there's anybody who is re-evaluating their trees, like I said, I would look at your tree scape that you've got and look and see where you are in the succession of, are they all new and young, and get some more investigation going to know as to where they're going to get to in 10, 20, 15 years, 30 years even. One of the things that's really simple to be done as well, if you're wanting to think about contributing to the wider landscape, is to go out into your landscape, have a look at the trees that are in your streets, in your parks. Can I bring a tree in where I can actually elongate, say, for example, nectar? So it might be the fact that you just see that in your street trees, they're all the same cherry tree, that all blossom at the same time, and there's nothing at the other end. So you might go, actually, I'm going to bring in a later flowering tree, for example. And also, as well, understanding that that you are contributing to the wider canopy. If we say that we've got 20, whichever website you go on, but if you've got 23 million gardens in this country and we all planted one tree, that would be 23 million trees, and there's a tree for every situation that we could do as one example. So I think it's like looking at your garden and thinking, patching it in to the macrocosm that you're in, and how can I shift what I've got in my garden to enhance that outside my garden fence.
Super. Sally, we've had a strong call of enthusiasm for water butts. Anything else you'd like to give us?
I love the idea of depaving. I think we have too many hard surfaces, particularly on front gardens. There's this wonderful scheme in Holland called tile tipping, where they're taking up these what I call council slabs in their gardens and getting them collected and recycled. And in exchange, they've given some seed to sow some grass, which is far better for you in a hot summer. So maybe look at your back garden, your spaces, or your front gardens particularly, and just see how many of those hard surfaces you could do away with, and put something permeable down in its place, so it doesn't all that water just doesn't rush off your front garden into the street and cause surface water flooding in your communities. So little simple things, if everybody just cleared a couple of metres in their gardens, that would all add up.
Super. Yeah, we're always pro-grass around here. And we've observed, actually, we've measured where we've been experimenting with cattle grazing. Taller grass covers, more photosynthesis, deeper roots, more carbon underground, but also just an amazing temperature differential close to the soil surface between grass that's been cut and grazed and grass that's been let to grow tall. And so, you know, the no-mow-may type movement's got to come along with that packet of seeds, I think. John?
Yeah, I mean, I think picking up on the depave thing, what we did with my daughter's front drive, which was block paved when she moved in, all block paved, I asked my daughter to not weed the paving. Not that she was going to do that anyway, obviously, but we left it a few months. We saw where all the weeds came up. That very much indicates where the car doesn't go and where you don't go. And then we lifted the block pavers where the weeds were. Now, obviously, if you're going to have a car parked, you need to flaunch the pavers that are left there, but it's really as simple as that. And then just top up with sand. You don't need to add soil in, just top up with sand. You've got sand, type 1 granite underneath. Sow a nice, sunny, drought-tolerant seed mix, and you'll have a beautiful space. Cheap as that. Literally take the pavers up. And the other thing I'd say about to increase the soft landscaping in a space, if we can guarantee, if we can assure designers that the maintenance is going to be good after they design an area, then they can stop designing as much hard landscape and they can design more soft landscape. The reason they don't do it, mostly, is because they know the maintenance is going to be crap. They know the maintenance is going to be useless, so they are forced to design in low-maintenance spaces. If we can give them gardeners, they can design high-maintenance spaces in, which are joyous places. Low maintenance is just taking the joy out of a landscape. That's what low maintenance is. If we actually give designers that assurance, I think we'd get beautiful, porous, wonderful, biodiverse, people-friendly spaces, to be honest.
Thanks. And Toby?
I'd like to touch on something Sally mentioned, which is mulch and the power of mulching. And I don't think it can be overstated how important it is for your soil to use a good mulch and to mulch frequently. The water-saving properties to a good mulch is incredible. We produce one where in the hot weather it creates a crust, and when you peel that crust up, underneath it's damp, it's moist. There's bug life, there's worm activity. You're saving water. You'll cut your watering down in the summer months by 2/3, and a good mulch should break down into your soil. So you're doing great for the soil, for its health. You're saving water, you're saving time, and I think mulching is something that everyone, I know it's more and more it's talked about on RHS and Gardeners Question Time and things like this, but yeah, I overemphasize how important it is for us all to be mulching more regularly.
Super, and it's carbon storage as well, of course. So, there's two main routes for carbon into soil: photosynthetic route out in through plant leaf, out through plant root. But also, you can, when you put brown material on soil, you're putting carbon down. And some of that will go back to atmosphere as microbes use it. But in a soil that's worked, where organic matter is applied and it contributes to the soil life, some of that carbon is stored as well. And I think we often don't think about that in gardens, that process of mulching is carbon storage, carbon capture and storage, which billions and billions of pounds of technical research money is being put into, when it could be being put into mulch, perhaps.
Absolutely, and a good mulch, worms love it. So if you no-dig, like Sally, the worms will drag that mulch down into the soil. That adds fibre. It can be a clay buster. That activity, it creates a thriving ecosystem there in your garden. And great soil health will mean great plant life. And if you're growing fruit and veg, then healthier plants. So I think it's very important.
Super. Thank you. Right. We are at the Song Thrush, so we are going to go to some audience questions. Have we got a roving mic yet? Can we have those hands back up? And any extras that have come to you since we've been talking?
Oh, I've got a bonus packet of seeds. That's nice. Well, I guess two things I want to say. One is an exhortation, really, and one is a question. We're talking about pollinators a lot, and my guess is everybody in this room has probably got a garden or somewhere outside with a flower. So they're probably already doing something for pollinators when they're in full wing. People talk about bees, but we've got to think about butterflies and all the other moths. But nobody looks and goes to the plant shops and says, which one will the caterpillars want from my pollinators? So we need to be sure, and garden designers and all gardeners need to be sure that we know not just what has nectar, because loads of things have nectar. We've got to have stuff that they can actually feed on in order to reproduce. So that's my exhortation. My question really is, what do we do about the larger growers and peat-free? I had my first garden in 1986. I've been an organic gardener ever since. I've never used a peat-based compost. Peat-free compost has been available since the 1980s. Yet a very well-known, very respected organic farmer in the southwest of England is only now saying, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do about peat-free compost. I won't tell you the words that came out of my mouth when I read that. But how are we going to get... There must be people out there who know how to farm peat-free, and we need to make sure... How do we get that information out there so that people aren't trying to reinvent the wheel 45 years after peat-free compost was first available?
I can start the conversation if you like. So I think we've done a lot of communication on Gardeners World, bringing it to people's attention. Again, I don't think it's ever a good idea to assume that people know stuff. When we sort of spoke earlier, I don't assume that everybody in this room knows everything. I certainly don't. So one of the things was raising the awareness to people that there were peat in compost, because people didn't know it wasn't on the bags. So that was the first thing. Also as well, the RHS is one organisation who is, they have a 5-year piece of research that's going on to help growers transition to be peat-free. It's a money thing. I would be ridiculous to not say that. Obviously, people's production of their plants and how they grow. It's like, it has been on peat. It's like saccharin. Peat got introduced into horticulture in the 1920s, 1930s. If you're a grower, you need to have a stable growing medium. And peat stabilises the growing medium and means it can sit on the shelf for a lot longer. So gardening with peat-free products, you've gone straight onto it, which is great. It's really about, again, re-educating people. And I wouldn't necessarily say the growers, because they kind of know what they need to do, but it's also re-educating the public as well about the fact of, would you be happy with a smaller plant? Are you going to make sure that when you buy your plants, you're going to get them straight in the ground? Because a lot of people don't like peat-free products because the watering regime is completely different, the way the wetting agents are different. So it's one of those things where it's through education. We are hoping and still waiting for legislation on it in terms of having peat-free products. The problem is as well is that because obviously a lot of our plants come in from overseas, which is great. I'm certainly not dissing any of our European friends, and they're not peat-free. So our peat-based nurseries, quite rightly, are concerned, OK, I'll go to all the expensive investing and going peat-free, yet the government's still allowing peat-based products to come in. So it's a big topic, and it is trying to be moved forward. It is. It might not feel like it when you're coming across your supplier there, but I think that we are still banging that gong, I can assure you.
If I could just add something on to the organic growers. I know there's a lot of research that's going on at the moment. One of the major issues that organic growers have is during the seed production process, where they use equipment to take the seedling, to transplant the seedling, and the peat-free compost don't behave in the same way. So it's a technical thing that as soon as they find something that holds together, that they can do it automated. It's the automated process of all of those seedlings being produced online, as it were. Then they will swap as quickly as possible, because I think they are as abhorrent as we are, that they have to use this medium because it's the only thing that works with this piece of kit.
It never occurred to me that any organic farmer would use peat until this person started saying, I don't know what to do without peat.
It's in, like as Sally said, a lot of it's in the plug stage. And of course, when you're growing at home, you've got a lot easier tolerance on what you do. You're not producing millions of plants. It's completely different. So I think that there is a technicality to it. I totally agree. I make it very simple. Why can't we be peat-free? Those plants don't grow on peatlands. That's ridiculous. But I also know I know technically it's not as easy as that because we've weaned ourselves onto a material that, you know, it's the water capacity, as I said, it's the wetting agents that's needed. Also as well with peat-free products, and again, you might correct me on your product there, but on peat-free products, the instability is greater. You know, when you have your peat-free compost laying in your garden, if you have a couple of hot days, it's degrading, it's actually biodegrading, versus if you have peat within it, it's a lot more stable and it lasts longer. So, of course, when you go to use that growing bag, the properties aren't the same. You didn't know. Yeah, and I don't.
Never having used peat, I've only got the example of never having used peat.
Yeah, but and then it's on a much smaller scale. It's a homegrown scale, which is fabulous, which is really good, really good.
Okay, we're going to move along from that question, if that's all right. Toby's stand is just outside the door there if anybody wants to go and talk about the technical makeup of composts on that topic. But we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'd like to take some more questions. If we can make the questions pretty snappy, we would get through a few more.
That's my answers. I'll be sure to.
Yeah.
This is a question for Sally. I have a small vegetable patch in my garden, which I try and garden with no dig. But I have just here today bought some Phacelia seeds to do green manure. And I've been told that in the spring I have to chop them down and dig them into my garden. So I'm wondering, does that count as no dig? Or is there another way of doing it?
I do. I have a lot of Phacelia. In fact, in my bag, I've got a little bag of seed to give away to people later. So with my Phacelia, I let it grow. I chop it down and let it go on the top. I don't dig. But you might want to use a green manure that actually is killed off by frost, so it creates a lovely tilth. So something like a mustard will probably be knocked off, or buckwheat will be finished off. But my Phacelia, I leave as much as possible amongst the plants because I love the flowers and they're really good for early pollinators. But then I just chop and just leave it.
So the roots won't regrow
Roots
around
are fine.
all your vegetables?
Living roots in the soil is fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hands up. I've got one at the back there, Eileen, close to the door. Can you get round there?
Excuse me.
Hiya. I was just curious. I've been hearing a lot about rain gardens and how that's quite good. I know that lawns are good for sort of soaking up the extra water, but not necessarily great for biodiversity. So what are your experiences with rain gardens and do they actually work?
Wendy.
Yeah, Wendy can
Come and
answer
ask.
that.
I don't know if you can
we
hear that,
have-
but Wendy in the front here is an expert in this area without a microphone.
Can we give Wendy a microphone?
Can we give Wendy a microphone, quick?
Because Wendy is the best person to answer.
Wendy, stick your hand up.
Thanks, Wendy.
I'm not sure you should give me a microphone. Nobody will be leaving. First of all, absolutely come and have a chat with me later. I've spent the last 15 years carving out a niche doing rain gardens with communities and in public spaces. And I'd love to talk more about rain gardens. While I've got a microphone, which I will return, I'd like to stand up and make a confession inspired by Arit in the last talk, to say, in 2009, I won a gold at Hampton Court and the award for the best sustainable garden, which was the first time that had happened. And that was in 2009. In 2012, I laid a square of artificial grass in my own garden. And I feel like now is a really good time to confess to that, because at the time it was a good solution to the functionality of that garden. And then in the intervening 12 years, I think all of us have learnt a lot about climate and what needs to happen, or what shouldn't happen anymore. And the laying of artificial grass, I never realised then, that impedes the permeability of soil underneath it. And it does cause extra runoff into drains. I won't even go into the other disadvantages of artificial grass, which include raising heat. which includes for your neighbours if you keep dogs and let the dogs poo all over the grass and then have to use bleach to wash the grass regularly, which also soaks into the soil. So I think there's lots and lots of things. I don't have dogs, by the way. And I haven't washed my artificial grass with bleach. It was kept under my daughter's trampoline. I blame children for lots of things, including me ever getting a trampoline in my garden, which I vowed I would never do 12 years ago. And we all do these things. We all learn. When I do talks about rain gardens, I love finding things that might not be obvious to people. It wasn't obvious to me 12 years ago that artificial grass would be a bad idea. It absolutely is now. And my question, if you like, to the panel would be, what's the best way now for me to dispose of, recycle, reuse that piece of artificial grass, apart from taking it to landfill? Because as far as I'm aware, there is no way of using it, reusing it sustainably, without it leaching harmful chemicals into the ground, without, taking it to landfill doesn't solve that. But that's my dilemma that I'm now left with.
Right, thank you for that question. I've had the wrap-up signal, so could we have a swift answer? Does anybody have a solution for that? Because it's something I've wondered about. Artificial grass does end up on dairy farms because it's good for cows' feet. It's very comfortable for walk on, but it also ends up, it's going to end up as microplastics sooner or later. So that's not a good place for it to end up end of life. Does anyone know what to do with that stuff?
No. Well, no.
John, no ideas.
No idea.
No, those we did interview some artificial lawn suppliers who had talked about ways that they would be recycling it, and it wasn't convincing. Is all I'm going to say. It was not convincing, and I think that again, having as an early on in design, I too had specified it. Obviously, I don't now. Again, this is not about. I'm not here ever to kind of. We make mistakes, but the point is that now you've got to make the decision as to whether or not you want to undo your cracked egg by lifting it and actually putting something down depending on the space, or allowing it to still be on the ground. It won't get recycled. That's the point. It just won't. We know there's a lot out there.
Not about artificial grass, because that's a long story. But just to go back on the peat-free thing, I think we should start growing plants bare root. We should start growing herbaceous plants bare root. We should start selling bare root, and that gets rid of all the transport, all the plastic, all the compost, all the extra watering. Bare root is definitely the answer. It's just that we've been kind of completely connected to pots and compost. Bare root is unbelievable. And there's a guy called Peter Korn in Sweden, if you want to look him up, he'll show you how successful it is to provide. And we've been using bare root plants in our garden. Summer, winter, plant them anytime.
Super. Right, thank you, John. We are getting signals from the back of the room that we definitely need to wrap up. We are now past the Tawny Owl and into something else. Can I ask you all to raise a hand for the panellists here?